I'm delighted to say joining us today is the always very dapper and chirpy Philip Ingram, MBE, former senior military intelligence officer. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I was thinking, like, there are some days I think, oh, we're going to talk about Ukraine. I'm so glad in particular. I'm always glad that you're in, and I'm sure our audience was glad that you're here. But I was particularly glad that you're here because one of the things about working in the military is, you know, you have to deal with facts. Mm-hmm. Facts are very, very important, aren't they? You can't. It's not what someone feels. I feel there are this many soldiers with this many guns. You actually have to deal with the real world, and we've not been dealing in the real world a lot lately. I think when we've talked about a lot of the ideologies that have permeated our society. What was your reaction to that landmark ruling from the Supreme Court yesterday?
I thought it was superb, common sense prevailing. And in the military, yes, you have to deal with facts, but you also have to deal with government policy. And
often these things...
Well, exactly. And what the Supreme Court ruling clarified was what the 2010 definition was in the Equality Act. And therefore, everything that's happened since 2010, where you've had the extremists coming in, trying to bring in woke policies and all the rest of it, most of that just has to be ripped up and start again. And the start again is really quite simple. It's men and women.
And this is the interesting thing, because this doesn't actually change the law. And we were talking about it all down the show yesterday, and yet the absurdity of needing 5 judges, spending months and months after 5 years of this court case, an 88-page report to tell us, well, as I pointed out yesterday, every 5-year-old knows. We know what a man is, we know what a woman is, we've always known. But it is amazing how many of our politicians, particularly in the Labour Party, Lib Dems and Greens just as bad, but particularly on the left, have been, well, just spouting abject nonsense. And it was really interesting talking to Rosie Duffield, the former Labour MP. She was elected as Labour MP back last year, but she was totally ostracised from the Labour Party. She's now sitting as an independent over the trans issue, which she simply said, the most outrageous, disgusting, transphobic, hateful thing one could possibly say, that only women have cervixes. Yeah. Well, like literally a statement of biological fact. Yeah. And she was told that she shouldn't have said that.
Well, I know it's ridiculous, and actually the best quote I saw today was from Ian Adkins, who's a good friend of the show, who put out on social media that Ed Miliband should connect all of the cabinet's bicycles to the national grid to harness the backpedalling that's going on.
Exactly.
Because that's the best way of getting towards net zero.
Well, exactly. And a lot of people pointing out that, Keir Starmer and others need to apologise. For 99.9% of women is completely biological, he said, and of course they haven't got a penis. That's what he told the Sunday Times just 2 years ago. A year before that, in 2022, he said trans women are women. That is not just my view, he said, that is actually the law. Again, that wasn't the law. That wasn't the law. It has been the law through the combined effects of the 2004 Gender Recognition Act and the 2010 Equality Act. And the point was, those two laws basically clashed. But where those two laws clash, it's very clear, the Equality Act and the use of the word women for women's safe, single-sex spaces, means biological women. It has been hilarious, I'm not going to lie, hilarious to see the backlash from some of the activists, but in particular, the platforming on Sky and BBC and elsewhere of many of these trans activists. This is a ruling about safeguarding women's rights. Yeah. Okay, you know when we had some of those court rulings about the post office, the sub-postmasters and what I don't recall the BBC after those rulings showing that these people had been wronged and that they needed to be owed money and an apology and have criminal convictions taken off their records and the like. I don't remember the BBC going, oh, well, we need to hear the views of the poor people running the top of the post office and how this has impacted them. I don't remember them doing that. But when there was a ruling from the Supreme Court saying that women have been wronged, girls have been wronged, and that our safe spaces are required spaces of single sex, and our sport has been stolen from us by a completely wrong interpretation of the law, they immediately go to the people who have wronged us, who have demanded our spaces. I find that absolutely extraordinary, and frankly, the BBC, somewhat insulting to the 51% of the population who are women.
Well, it's not just insulting women, and I think that's where the biggest victory lies. But it's also insulting other minority groups. So it's brought a safe space for lesbians.
Yep.
It's the trans extremists are not fighting for a cause for those individuals who want, for whatever reason, to identify and
do what you want. Live your life.
Live as if they were a different sex. They want to force it on people. And actually, those that want to do that quietly, without raising and all the rest of it, the extremists, the trans extremists, are actually hurting them.
Oh, completely. The people who've been most hurt by this are people who were just, you know, I don't really understand what people mean by that. I'm going to live as a woman, other than you're going to, I don't know, grow your hair long and wear a dress. Well, I mean, I don't think people even notice people dressing what might be regarded as strangely anymore. I really don't. I live in central London. Oh my God. I mean, people dress however they want. It's like,
nobody cares.
No, really, nobody cares.
And, you know,
live your life, but I do care. I do care if you're going into the toilets and there's an 8-year-old girl in there who's going to be scared because she'll recognise you as obviously being a man. No, it's just that simple. It's not complicated. It was never complicated. This was never a trans hate, you know, anything like that. It was simply about just upholding the rights that women had won over many, many years.
And if our politicians were grown up, they'd turn around and say,
Sauce.
I got it wrong, sorry. And, you know, it's not as if we haven't got senior legal brains at the top of government who should turn around and say, I'm sorry, I got my interpretation wrong.
But again, no, but they actually claim to believe this stuff. I mean, you know, Angela Rayner has declined to apologise for endorsing a charter describing feminist groups raising fears about the treatment of trans children as hate groups. She's talked about campaigns for single-sex rape refuges for women as, I kid you not, trans exclusionist hate groups.
Yeah. See,
wow. Just wow. In an interview back in 2022, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, refused 3 times to define what a woman is, saying she was not going to get into rabbit holes on this. Yeah. I mean, just utterly bizarre. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, at a Labour Party fringe conference, Labour Party conference fringe event in 21, said there are some dinosaurs on the right, and those dinosaurs exist in our own party who want to hoard rights. He's talking about discussing trans rights. He says, I will always be on the side of minority communities kept out of the mix for having the freedoms everyone else has enjoyed. This is the thing. I mean, no one was taking away trans people's rights. They talk about the trans rights and demand, like Stonewall saying this is deeply worrying. They have exactly the same rights as everybody else.
Exactly.
And those rights mean you could use the facilities that biologically match your body.
And the people whose rights have suffered. You know, look at Professor Robert Winston. There's nobody who's more qualified in genetics and how the human being works than him. And he's been cancelled by many of the mainstream media
after going on Question Time.
Because he went Question Time to say men and women, and you can't have.
And he was very clear. You know, he basically. And I remember Fiona Bruce, the host, was saying, you know, brace yourselves. Brace yourselves for a geneticist stating genetic facts.
Yeah,
and that was controversial on the BBC.
Exactly.
These people are a joke.
And there are genetic mutations. You know, the XX in chromosomes is you're a woman, XY is you're a man. The two variations that are more common are XXY and XXXY. But that mutation could only happen in the male.
So there we are then. It's just not complicated, is it? You know, one of the most interesting things about this, a senior barrister was pointing out yesterday, which is that this doesn't change the law, it simply clarifies the law, and that means that with all these employment tribunals and all of these cases where people have been excluded, they've lost their jobs, they can now go back. There's going to be a heck of a lot of money being paid out. Sue the backsides off everybody who did this. People have to pay. The trouble is, it's going to be the taxpayer that ends up paying for a lot of this, but so be it. People have been wronged for standing up on this. I'm so excited we're going to be talking to one of the women who brought this case. There are so many people talk about J.K. Rowling and you know really amazing women, Sharon Davies and people like that. I admire them so much. But there are also so many women whose names we barely know who have actually fought this fight on the ground at great personal expense to their incomes, their reputations, to the abuse they've had. And I'm just in awe. I'm in awe of these women, and everyone should be. And they are women, not cis women. They are women. We'll talk about all that throughout the show. I want to hear from you. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Do you think things will change though? Also want to talk about this plot for a one-in, one-out asylum scheme. We've got a record 705 illegal migrants crossed the channel in 24 hours. The latest official figure is 8,888. And a pleasant, lovely number to look at of people who crossed. Of course, it's more than 40% up on the same months, same winter, spring months as last year. But the idea of this is that we will get to hand back channel migrants to the French. They don't really want them back, but they get to basically hand over to us in return a family member of someone who has already come to this country. Obviously, it'll be a family member who doesn't have a right to be here and who's just seeking to join family members. Now, I'm not quite sure how that will actually make things better on the basis, Philip, that one of the main reasons people often send their young men, the strongest, fittest member of their family, or you know, the village, they send them over so they can establish a life here, and then you can use European, equality rights to claim, human rights to claim your right to bring your family together.
Yeah, it's daft. It's completely.
There you go. That's all you need to say. It's daft.
They're going to have to establish some mechanism of identifying these individuals and therefore starting them in the asylum-seeking process in France. Well, why don't you just do that anyway? And then tell anyone that comes in without going through that process, then they can't come in. Everyone that's military-age male should be automatically deported. Anyone that comes in without a passport or an identity document that's there should be put on a plane as they come straight to an airport. Oh, Rwanda would be quite good. And the only thing
why has no one thought of that?
The only thing about Rwanda was it's just a matter of volume of aircraft. The Labour Party did not let it start. If it had started, you could have put more aircraft in and put more. Well,
that's it. I was debating actually with a shadow cabinet minister now, but we had been in government. They were saying that Rwanda wouldn't have worked because it wasn't on the scale that it worked in Australia, because it was everybody. Nobody gets in the country, and that worked within months, not even years, within months. But he was saying no, the intention was absolutely to up the numbers. I don't think we would ever have upped the numbers to the numbers it needed to be. It needed to be pretty much everybody who got across the channel. Can I just ask you, before we go to break, and I'd love, by the way, to hear your thoughts on that. I know that Ian Collins and others were talking about that when it emerged yesterday. But also the Ukraine talks. Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, has arrived, I think, is it in Italy to have talks? In France to have talks on Ukraine. Now, of course, it's interesting. Steve Witkoff, who's the sort of the envoy,
Donald Trump's golfing
partner. Yeah. He's spoken to Putin a number of times. Obviously, he's talked to Trump a lot of times. Hasn't actually gone to Ukraine. It's extraordinary. Do you have any hope that there will be any move towards some sort of ceasefire or long-standing peace?
Well, talking to EU members, NATO members in Paris is not talking to Ukraine and Russia together. Russia doesn't want a ceasefire. Russia doesn't want peace, so it's not going to happen. This is America trying to further ensure that Europe steps up if something happens, and that's right and proper. Because America's concentrating quite clearly on what's happening in Southeast Asia in relationships with China, and we're all focusing on what's going on in the Middle East. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, there are just so many things going. Who would ever want to be a Secretary of State to the US in particular?
Well, he's not allowed to do anything, because you've got Witkoff doing it, and then you've got JD Vance as the attack dog in the Oval Office, and Marcus Rubio, who should be doing all of this, is sitting there on the sofa going, I don't know what I'm doing.
A small point worth making.